Well, welcome back once again to The Haunted Beard. My name is Jake, and I have been making my way through the entire Nightmare on Elm Street series. Today, I want to talk about Wes Craven's A New Nightmare. But before I do, if you like content like this and you're interested in horror and thriller movie content, that is what I do on my channel, The Haunted Beard. So click that red subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, let's get into the movie. So Wes Craven's A New Nightmare came out in 1994, and this time, a demonic force has chosen Freddy Krueger as its portal to the real world. Can Heather Langenkamp play the part of Nancy one last time and trap the evil trying to enter our world? Now, I want to start off with talking about what I think is the best aspect of this thing, and that is Heather Langenkamp's performance. It's really cool seeing her play a version of herself and also Nancy to a degree. And so just kind of that dynamic there, I really like seeing. Right at the beginning of the movie, we learn that Heather is dealing with a stalker. She's been getting these phone calls where she is being harassed. And so she's become paranoid and is filled with anxiety. And there's just a lot of emotions to her performance. So what ends up happening is her son Dylan ends up getting these like episodes. He starts sleepwalking and is having these night terrors and just having these manic kind of episodes. And I think you can kind of read into this movie a little bit beyond just the surface level, and that it's about a parent's fears regarding their children, and more specifically their children's health and safety and well-being.
Who's got my baby? Who? Freddy! Freddy? Who? Freddy Krueger or something?
What the hell's going on?
My baby! Freddy's got my baby! He's got my Dylan!
And I think another way you can look at it is that it's a movie about emotional trauma and dealing with PTSD and anxiety and harassment and things like that. There's just a lot of complicated emotions that are in this movie conveyed by Heather Langenkamp. And I think she just does a really solid job with everything. I think her performance is very good. And as I said, I think it's the best aspect of this entire film. I also really enjoy the meta aspect of this movie, as Wes Craven would go on right after this to direct Scream. And I happen to have reviewed that movie on this channel, and I absolutely love it. It is one of my favorite movies. I'll put a link down in the description if you want to check that out. But the meta aspect here I really like. I think just the idea and the concept of it is great, and this is almost a bit of like a trial run in preparation for Scream. I really like that Wes wrote this to where he is playing a version of himself in this movie, and he gets this inspiration again, and he's having nightmares again, as they say in the film, and he starts writing a new film. And I like how what he is writing in the script ultimately comes true through what Heather is experiencing. What he is writing is now entered into the real world, and it's affecting Heather Langenkamp. I really like that. I also really like what they do later on in the film, where John Saxon comes back, and it's almost like Heather has now entered into the fictional reality of the film, as she calls on John, but he doesn't recognize that name, and he doesn't recognize her as Heather. She is now Nancy. And so, again, I like that aspect. I like that choice there. Unfortunately, though, not much of this film works beyond just the conceptual idea of it for me. Now, I'll just come right out and say it before I get into this. I know that I'm going to be in the minority here. This is going to be an unpopular opinion. I know that a lot of people like this film and have it ranked towards the top of their nightmare rankings, and so I am going to be in the minority, but I have to be honest, and so these are just my thoughts. The main thing that affects this movie for me is, unfortunately, the performance of Nico Hughes as Dylan. And I hate to say it, because he's just a kid actor, and I feel bad about it, but I just have to be honest in that, I think he was only, 6 or 7 during the time of filming, but his performance for me is just, it's not very good. He's such an integral part of this movie. So much of what this movie tries to do in terms of scaring us and building suspense and tension and just having that intensity to it, he is such a big part of, and unfortunately his performance really just kind of hinders the overall effectiveness for me. and it just doesn't really work very well at all. As I mentioned, he has these kind of night terrors and is sleepwalking in these episodes, and they go to that well many times where Heather will wake him up and he'll just start screaming. And like that's one of the main things that they use is just like he's having these screaming terrors, and they just go to that well so many times. There's a handful of times where he'll do the Freddy voice.
Too late. I'm almost there. Almost there.
And it just, man, it just kind of kills the whole vibe of it for me. It just does not work very well at all. They also use the earthquake effect so many times. It has to be at least half a dozen, if not more. And I know maybe in a way you could kind of interpret that as the inner turmoil and kind of mental breakdown that Heather is going through, but man, they just go to that well so many times and it just becomes repetitive. And I think the film is lacking in atmosphere quite a bit too. And I often struggle with judging a movie based on what it is versus what it isn't. Because this movie isn't really going for the same thing in terms of atmosphere that the other Nightmare movies are going for. One of the things that I think make the other Nightmare movies so good, at least some of them, is that you have the dream nightmare aspect. And so you have this fantastical, super creative, over-the-top dream world that just really gives the films such rich atmosphere. And this film doesn't really have that. And is it fair to critique the film for what it isn't? Because it isn't necessarily going for the same thing that the other movies are going for. And so, as I said, in a way, it feels like the atmosphere is lacking, but is that really a fair critique? Because it's not really what it's going for exactly. However, I think even setting aside the lack of atmosphere and really trying to judge this movie based on what it does give us, I think what it does give us is unfortunately not very effective. A lot of what it's trying to scare us with and give us that tension takes place in the real world, which can be done well. I just don't think it handles it very well. It just doesn't come across as very scary to me, and so it just doesn't really work. Now I want to get into some more specifics because I think that there is one scene that is pretty great, that works really well, that gives us that dreamlike aspect that is just really effective, and that's the scene at the funeral. Right after Heather's husband died, you get this great scene at a funeral where an earthquake happens again. She falls over and knocks herself unconscious, and then her son Dylan disappears, and it turns out Freddy's got him, and he's pulling him down into the casket. You have just this great little creative idea where he's getting pulled down into this almost endless tunnel into the casket, and Heather jumps in after him to rescue him, and then her husband wakes up and starts talking to her, and just a really solid scene. I think it's the best, at least the scariest for sure, scene in the entire film. Now I want to give more or less a scene-by-scene breakdown of the last act of the movie and just kind of get into some more specifics as far as what works and what doesn't work for me. So I want to start with the scene where Heather comes back to the hospital to visit her son. She ends up falling asleep, and this scene is a bit mixed for me. I like the setup here, and there's parts of it that work. Unfortunately, again, the kid's performance just kind of takes away from it. He wakes up and starts screaming and freaking out again, does the Freddy voice, which just really doesn't work that well for me at all. Then you got the nurses coming in, and the nurse is getting ready to like cut him open, and of course she turns into Freddy, and just as he, sticks the kid with his blades, Heather wakes up. And so I like that aspect of it. Again, it's kind of a mixed scene for me. Then after this, we get the scene with Julie, the babysitter, and this scene just comes across as unintentionally funny and kind of corny as she punches a nurse in the face and then threatens to stab another one with a shot needle. And then Freddy shows up, and we get pretty much a direct copy from Tina's kill out of the original film, only it was done way better and more effectively in the original than it is here. And so it's like, it just doesn't really work all that well. It's like, yeah, we've seen this before and we've seen it better. And so it just it's just not that great to me. After this, we get the scene where Heather is chasing Dylan, who is sleepwalking across the highway, and we get some pretty shoddy green screen and dated CG here that just takes away from its effectiveness. Then you get the part where Freddy lifts Dylan up off the road and out of the way of traffic, which just is just corny and cheesy looking and just does not look very good at all. Then Heather gets back home as she's followed Dylan and realizes that he's been taken by Freddy, and she has to go after him. And I really like this part. She's taken the sleeping pills and chases after him into his bed, right? And then she gets into the dream world, and she's going under his covers down into the tunnel into the dream world. I really like just the visual presentation of this scene. I think it works pretty well. And then we get the whole finale, which for me is just it doesn't really work all that great for me. Freddy chases Dylan into this fireplace, only Freddy gets stuck at the opening, and he's reaching out trying to grab him, and Heather ends up waking up, and she's running after him, and she goes up these stairs, and then you get another direct copy from the original with her going up the stairs, and they turn into this muddy, sticky stuff, and so she's trying to fight it and get up the stairs to save her son, and it's like we've seen this before already, and she ends up getting to Freddy and stabs him, and then you get this whole scene where Freddy's tongue goes out and wraps itself around Heather, and then Dylan stabs his tongue, and this whole part is just really corny and goofy to me as Freddy's mumbling around with a split tongue. It just doesn't work. And then he finds himself inside the fireplace, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because just a minute ago he was stuck in the doors and couldn't get in it, and now he's inside the fireplace. And so then he catches on fire, and we get a pretty bad CGI effect where he turns into a demon and then lights on fire and explodes, and that's pretty much the end of the movie. And so yeah, look, overall I just unfortunately kind of was pretty underwhelmed and disappointed with this thing. I know, as I said, I'm going to be in the minority here. I know it seems like the majority of Nightmare fans are fans of this movie and like it quite a bit. And so this is going to be a hot take and an unpopular opinion. I get it, but I got to be honest, and just those are my thoughts. But hey, I mean, if you like this thing, I'm glad that you do, but it just doesn't really work all that well for me. So I think in the end, my grade for this is probably going to be at like a 4 out of 10. But, that's just my thoughts. Hit me up down in the comments, though. Let me know what you think of this thing, why you like it, what about it works for you, or maybe you're like me and aren't a big fan of it. But hit me up down in the comments. Also, too, do you like Dylan's performance? Does his performance work for you, and what do you think of it? So let me know. Would love to hear from you. So those are my thoughts on Wes Craven's new Nightmare. Next up, we've got 2 movies left in this thing, but next up is I guess you'd call it a spin-off from 2003, Freddy vs. Jason. So that is up next. I am looking forward to it. We will see you then on The Haunted Beard.